Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to our April 2026 AOI meeting. Thanks for being with us today. I'm Cindy Gwelly. I'm president of AOI this year, and we're so glad that you can join us for what is our April meeting, but feels a little bit like July out there. So we're getting an early taste of that. If you were here at our last meeting, our March meeting, or if you weren't and want to get a look at that, we do have our video of the presentation by journalist Chip Reed. That is available on our YouTube channel, on our website, and we are going to go ahead and take the video of that plus the meeting as our official record of our March 2026 meeting. If you didn't get a chance to see that, certainly he had some interesting stories to tell about being in DC. We do have, to start off with, a couple of new members, and I am going to let John Edwards, our vice president, go through them, and then we can vote them in.
Okay. We have 4 new members. It was 3 when I walked in. Now it's 4. So we just keep getting them. Jerry Laporte, Michael Gorman, Karen Simpson, who I believe are not here, but we do have one new member here, Zilla Jackson Wesley. Stand up, stand up. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Zilla Jackson Wesley, Washingtonian. Still live in the city, very active. I live in the Petworth area. I grew up in Columbia Heights, and all my sisters still live here in the city, and my children all live here. I have 2 grandchildren. Presently, I have a small consulting business, Care Wellness DC, and I'm presently still consulting for Howard. I'm not full-time there anymore. And it's such a pleasure. I met, I forget the lady's name, at one of the fairs, and she said, you must join, you must join. So it went a year, then a year and a half, so now I'm here. Thank you. And my friends over here as well. Thank you.
So welcome, and I think we need to vote people in. So can I suggest we vote by acclamation? So moved. All in favor?
Aye.
Congratulations, we have 4 new members.
Thank you. Perfect, thank you. We are growing by leaps and bounds, so thank you all for coming. I want, speaking of joining and renewing, we do have still about 70 members who have not renewed. So a lot of people do kind of forget that they haven't renewed. So if you are in question about whether you have or have not, you can email us and we can let you know. And you can also ask when you check in at the front desk if you have. So we hope that you continue to join us, and we love to have you here. Speaking of emails, some people are still, this is all of our social media, but some people are still, I believe, not getting emails from us. We are in the process of still trying to work out some of those tech issues. So you should receive about 3 emails per month from us. The evites to the luncheons, and then some reminders about the luncheons. So if that is not the case, if you do not get those, please let us know, because something is happening and we can easily be caught in your spam, or you have unsubscribed unwittingly and do not get them. But we want to make sure that you're informed. So certainly let us know if that's the case, and we'll try to fix that for you. Again, don't forget that on our website, you can, if you would like to, when you RSVP for lunch, you can skip the line, you can pay online, and we will have your name tag ready for you to just pick up and have a seat. Still, you can say hello. We'd love to talk to you at the front desk, but you can just go ahead and skip and sit down. So everything, if in doubt, I feel like I'm talking to my classes. Usually when I say to my classes, if in doubt, it's on the syllabus, but if in doubt, it's on the website. Always go back to the website or always email us, and we can certainly get you any information that you need. I have this up here as a reminder that we do have today, and we will have at every lunch, a scanner for you. So I want to make sure that you know that if there's anything that you have at home, we would like to make sure, as part of our preservation efforts, that you get to preserve your own photos, family photos, your professional documents, family diary, letters, anything that you feel is important to save. We want to make sure that you have a way to do that. So please bring them in, and we will help you scan them in at the beginning of lunch, and we will send you home with your very own flash drive or digital copy of it so that you can preserve it for all time. Email it to your kids, email it to other family members or other archives, just to make sure that we keep all of these records intact and redundant. We want to make sure that they are as available to everybody that you want them to be as possible. Do not feel that you have to bring in a box load of items. I mean, you may, but don't feel that. So if you come across one afternoon a photograph of your mother sitting on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, and you want to make sure you get that scanned in, bring it in. One picture. We'll help you scan it in. We'll help you get it digitized. And you can walk home with that that same day. And you can do that multiple times. So we will have that for you. But we want to make sure that our members get to keep their memories as well. We do, speaking of that, have our podcast. It is growing in popularity. I think we have had at least 4 people listen to various podcasts on there. So exponentially growing, I might add. So you can go to SoundCloud and look for the podcast there, but you can also, again, on our website. You can click right through our website and you can get to it. This is where we are going to have more and more of our member stories and more of our memories when I can actually figure out the technology part of it, to be able to come and talk to you what you remember about 9/11, what you remember about the bicentennial. So one way or another, you will have plenty of opportunities to transmit your memories so that we can keep them as part of our AOI collection, if we can convince you to do so. You can find us on just about every social media outlet that you can think of, and if there is one that you go to regularly that we are not on, let us know, and we can set something up so that you'll be able to follow us on a regular basis. And we also have our William Noble Brown Preservation Fund, which is an ongoing project and an ongoing fundraiser that we are using with all of these preservation efforts to not only collect our own records and our own history, but to use them to collect our current members' history, so that in the future, when somebody's looking back in another 160 years, the details that you don't think are that important, or your memories that you think everybody else has, will be vital to somebody researching DC history in 160 years. Knock on wood, that we get to another 160 years of DC, of people looking at DC history. So thank you for that. We also do have a draft of a plan for, so it's more than a concept of a plan, but it's a draft of a plan for our preservation of our records. So we're working on that, and again, hope to have that ready to go and in place for the summer. So if anybody wants to volunteer to work on preservation of AOI records, if you have a hankering to go into the archives and the libraries and to scan and learn how to scan and learn how to preserve, please contact us. We will be looking for volunteers at some point for that too. So I'll put that notice out right now. Speaking of Bill Brown, I'm going to throw this to past President Bill Brown so he can tell us a little bit about what has been going on with the DC archives. Do you have you want to come right here? Here, come on up.
Oh, can I?
Yes, please.
So for those of you that may or may not know, AOI is kind of closely associated with the DC archives because AOI's past president, Dr. Phil Ogilvie, who was my immediate predecessor as president, established the DC archives in the Barry administration back in the mid-1980s. Well, actually, 40 years ago this year, they were formally established. And Phil had wanted, up until the time that DC acquired or established their own archives. Everything was held by the National Archives and Records Administration. They were scattered all over the place and everything. Well, Phil was able to convince the powers that were at the time for DC to get control of all their records, except I believe there's certain exceptions, like not the court records, but they've got birth certificates, health records, death certificates, wills, recorder of deeds, all this stuff. They first started it and I didn't know this till yesterday when I went to the 40th anniversary event that Kimberly Bassett, who's the Secretary, she just says Secretary of the District of Columbia, which is a little misleading. She is the district's state secretary. So she is the city's Secretary of State if we were a state. So anyhow, they had a 40th anniversary celebration. I didn't know until Anita Bonds got up and spoke that the archives under Phil Ogilvie actually had a small space in the old Recorder of Deeds building down at, 5th and D Street or something now that's historically landmarked but is vacant with all of its nice WPA art. Who knows what's happening to that? Anyhow, it got too big for its britches. They acquired space in the old horse stables on Naylor Court where the archives have been ever since. So now there's a huge initiative, which to my way of thinking, and those of you that know me know I'm awfully editorial and opinionated, has been going on way too long to build a new DC archives. I wish I had stock in Hartman Cox because they've designed about 5 different versions of the new DC archives in all different locales in the city, but they finally decided on a design, and the new archives are to be located on the University of the District of Columbia property. So that's great not only for the university, but for access via metro and all, of course, at Van Ness and Connecticut, it's a real nice spot. I was pleased to see that in their pamphlet that they published for yesterday's event, that they list the public records administrators, and here's Dr. Philip Ogilvie as he established it. They gave a nice shout out to AOI for our continued support. You may not know that, again, there was a group, and I guess there still is, a group, the Friends of the DC Archives, which was just sort of a loose-knit group trying to encourage and provide testimony and support of the archives back then and the new archives and everything else, kind of loosey-goosey and not very well organized. Well, AOI funded the establishment, covered all the, the initiation costs or whatever, for the library, the DC Archives Foundation, okay, which was started by our director, Kim Bender, and an associate. So now there's a foundation, 501c foundation, that supports the DC Archives and the new DC Archives, and they'll be able to take donations and all and, have some influence over how money is spent, whereas you can't give to the DC government in support of preservation of records and everything. Another thing I thought was real nice is when Council Member Anita Bonds, and this is her last term, she's giving up, she's an at-large member, she, at the podium, at the lectern yesterday, said that she hopes when the new library opens that the reading room, the archives itself or something is named for Phil Ogilvie. So I thought that was very nice, just from her. No encouragement from us. I think that, but I'm not, this with Anita Bonds to say, hey, why don't you name it for Phil Ogilvie? She came up with that on her own. Real briefly, I'll just say that, we provided some written remarks. They were real busy and stressed out and all yesterday. But, had we been able to say something, we would have said it was a privilege to join in celebrating 40 years of the District of Columbia Archives, a vital institution that preserves the record, stories, and civic memory of our city. The archives stand as a testament to the belief that a community's past must be cared for, accessible, and honored so that future generations can learn from it. We owe particular gratitude to Dr. Philip W. Ogilvie, a former president of the Association of the Oldest Inhabitants, whose leadership and tireless advocacy were instrumental in establishing the city's own archives distinct from the National Archives and Records Center. His vision ensured that local records would remain rooted here in the district where they belong and where they can best serve residents, scholars, and public servants alike. As we mark this milestone, let us recommit to supporting the archives through stewardship, use, and advocacy so that the full breadth of Washington's civic life remains preserved, illuminated, and available to all. May the next 40 years deepen our understanding of the district's past and strengthen our shared civic future. So there you go. There's your update. If you live in DC and any of your council members are on the fence or something about financial support or budgetary support for the archives, give them a little goose and make them vote in support of the archives. Somebody had a question in the back or something. Well, there are collections at the DC History Center. In fact, they contain AOI's rather large collection, our own collection. As I understand, I don't know if, as part of the new archives, some of those records, like the court records and all, will be sought to be brought in from NARA or not. But if I recall just off the top of my head, it's health records, birth certificates. Of course, they didn't even start recording births until 1877 or something like that, some really, late date. Death certificates, deeds, wills. They've got photographs. Yeah, they got photographs. They've got letters of incorporation, letters of incorporation and all kinds of things. It's a nice treasure trove for genealogical research if you had ancestors born in D.C. or who owned property or perished or died in D.C. So it'll be great. It's kind of off-putting now because, like I said, it's in a horse stable. They said yesterday that their collection is enough to cover 6 football fields. Now I don't know whether that's two-dimensional or boxes or what, but they said their current holdings is enough to cover whatever the square footage or yardage of 50 by 100 and times 6. So they've got quite an extensive collection, and they're operating with just a minuscule staff. It's Dr. Lopez Matthews is the director, Bill Branch is still there after years, Ali Rockman, and like 1 or 2, they're just skeleton staff. So if you want to do research, I think you go online and fill out a research request so that they can have the boxes waiting for you when when you arrive for your appointment. So that's sort of all I know. There's the update, and we'll try to keep everyone updated on the progress of this.
If you're interested to learn a little bit more about it, Dr. Lopez Matthew came to talk to us about developing this building and the archives. And that is on our YouTube channel as well. So you can go and listen to him, and he's got some other drawings and tells you a little bit more about what's in there. I think there will be some material items as well. He did talk about having the old electric chair that used to be used for DC. So I'm guessing that there are some big items like that will also be part of it. They now have Alexander Roby's walking stick, thanks to AOI member John Richardson, who donated it. And a couple of the World War I tree memorial shields that both Barbara Bates was researching and Bill found online. So there's a lot of AOI connections to it. So throw our name around if you go down there. See if you get extra special attention. You won't, but you might as well let them know that that's where you're from. Another thing we've been talking about in terms of preservation are the current plans for different federal buildings, including the White House and the ballroom and EEOB and the Kennedy Center. So just as an update, if you hadn't heard, because this is as of March, that there are 8 different organizations that are suing the administration on behalf of preservationists in the city in order to make sure that any changes to the Kennedy Center have to undergo the same process that any other federal building has. Now, we know that doesn't always mean that is going to stop demolition or that will succeed, but there have been some successes in terms of getting stoppages on some of the construction and demolition that have been occurring. So we'll keep you up to date on that. But one of the organizations that is on this list is one of AOI's close friends, the Committee of 100 for the Federal City. So AOI has mostly kind of allowed, so to speak, the Committee of 100 to do some advocacy on our behalf. We do have a grant that we give them a donation every year, and we know that it is, we are well served by having them speak kind of for us, or at least as kind of along the same lines as what we might do as well. To that point as well, as we collect memories, I think it would be nice as we do the podcast to collect memories of the Kennedy Center before some of those things have changed and what it might mean to people, as well as the golf courses. One of our first guinea pigs for that is Bryant Cole, who has agreed to give us a kind of an oral history about but his experiences and his relationship to the golf courses. So we would like to collect things like that. So that is something you can also very shortly be able to hear on our SoundCloud as well on our podcast. These are things you can also talk into your phone and collect at home if you don't want to wait for us, or we could do interviews by Zoom. So if any of these things strike your fancy, talking about 9/11, talking about the bicentennial, about your relationship and your experiences at the Kennedy Center and what you saw there, or on the golf courses, or any other these federal buildings, if you have worked there and experiences with those buildings, let us know. We will help you record them. I think this is a moment in time where there's so much change that we want to make sure that we preserve as many of these, not only memories, but kind of document what things were like at these particular given moment in time. So speaking of our preservation efforts and what things were like, today is April 16th. It is DC Emancipation Day. And there are a lot of celebrations that are going on. Some are going on right now. Some are going on throughout today. Some you can catch on Sunday. The big DC Emancipation Day parade and concert is going to be going on Sunday, all day Sunday on Pennsylvania Avenue. And this is the flyer for it. This was not a holiday for most of our lifetimes. So you might not necessarily exactly know what it is or how it got to be a DC holiday. And you might also be a little confused as to what it is with Juneteenth. So I thought that today might be a good kind of quick primer as to what the difference is between those two and how it connects to AOI as we talk about our AOI history. So I'm not sure if you can see it particularly well, but on the left is April 16th, today, celebrating DC Emancipation Day. The DC is a very important part of that. So that commemorates April 16th, 1862. And that is the day that President Lincoln signed the DC Emancipation Act. And that abolished slavery in the District of Columbia. It's also an important note that the slave trade had already been abolished in DC in 1850. So in this kind of weird gray area, slavery was still legal in DC, but the slave trade, the buying and selling, had been illegal since 1850. So this is the first time the federal government passed any legislation to abolish slavery. That's what makes it incredibly important. It is the first, it predates the Emancipation Proclamation by about 10 months, so that's why it is important. It is also the only and first example of compensated emancipation in the entire country. So to add insult to injury, the good news is that enslaved people have their freedom. The kind of bad news is that the federal government's going to compensate not the enslaved people, but their, quote, owners, right? So the federal government paid out over $1 million to compensate the, quote, owners of over 3,100 people who had been enslaved in the district. So this day celebrates the day that was signed into law, and that was the official ending of slavery within the District of Columbia. This will not be an official holiday. It was declared a holiday in 1996 and did not become an official DC government holiday until 2005. So these dates are pretty recent. So a little bit to be confused sometimes with Juneteenth. So Juneteenth celebrates June 19th, 1865, almost 3 years later. And this is the date that is recognized as the time that enslaved people in the westernmost Confederate state, which was Texas, officially found out about their freedom through the Emancipation Proclamation. This is when Union troops came and read the Emancipation Proclamation and let them know that they were no longer legally enslaved. So that was in Galveston Bay. So that was an official Texas holiday in 1979, and that became a federal holiday in 2021. So all of these are recent. So it's celebrating essentially the same basic idea, which is the abolishment of slavery, but it is doing it on 2 different days. So DC celebrates both, and you will see that as both. One is a DC government holiday, and one is a federal holiday. And you'll note from these dates, so this is June 19th, 1865. The Civil War, Appomattox, the surrender at Appomattox has already happened. That is April 9th, 1865. Abraham Lincoln is shot and dies April 14th and 15th, 1865. So this is 2 months later, 2 months that after all of that had happened, that people are still enslaved in Texas when that is abolished. So that gives you some idea as to how each of these had been celebrated and how kind of messy the, quote, ending of the Civil War was. And it is into all of that that we do have an AOI connection. And one of these connections is from the first citywide celebration of DC Emancipation Day, which happened in 1866. So this was the first April, the first time to celebrate the Emancipation Act after the end of the Civil War. And it's also only about 3 weeks after the Civil Rights Act of 1866 was passed. And the Civil Rights Act itself was the first to identify that all people born in the United States were considered citizens, so birthright citizenship, and that there were equal rights for all citizens born in the United States. So it was landmark legislation. So 1866, the city explodes with celebration. It had to be delayed by 3 days because it was really muddy in the city. We were still dealing with infrastructure issues, but they were still happy. So there was a parade. There were bands. The parade winds around through the White House, and the president gives a speech. It is only so received because it is President Johnson at this time. It's not President Lincoln, but he gives a speech. They wind around by General Grant's headquarters. They go by the Capitol. They end in Franklin Square, and there are troops, the U.S. colored troops that come and are presenting. And there are about 10,000 people who celebrate in the city at this time. And it is well covered, and it is well kind of received for it. So this was so important in 1866 because of this. This is covered by Harper's Weekly. This is the first time in these types of numbers that African Americans can gather in the city of Washington legally in this type of way to celebrate. This is the first time to reclaim public space since the Black Codes that restricted how and where and why and when African Americans could gather in the city. So this is a reclaiming of political rights. It's a reclaiming of public space. There were signs about voting rights for African Americans. So there is a lot after 160 years that we're dealing with today that this could look like a no kings protest or a political protest that is going on in Washington. and you would see some of the same signs and some of the same issues: birthright citizenship, voting rights, and kind of reclaiming public space. So it's fascinating to me that has gone on. So the symbolism of it in the city, the recognition by the federal and the local government, is also incredibly important. And AOI was literally created in the midst of this. So AOI was less than 4 months old and was still working on its own constitution while that parade was going on. So the constitution for AOI would not be adopted until May, so only about 2 or 3 weeks after this, that the constitution for the organization was adopted. So these founders were still reeling from the Civil War, from Lincoln's assassination, from the upheaval in the city, from changes to its population. The city is going to more than double over the course of the decade from 1860 to 1870. The social and the racial makeup of the city, the instability of Reconstruction and the Civil War in the city, and also a Congress and a White House who had competing views of what Reconstruction was going to look like and what rights for all was going to look like. Joseph Bradley gave us a speech to AOI, one of its first, to its membership in July. And one of the things he talks about was saying that we're in the midst of another revolution, not less momentous than that which was inaugurated 90 years ago. And he talks about these discordant elements. And announcements about AOI were talking about the fact that people felt like that they were strangers in a strange land, and so many new things and new people happening. So that is what AOI comes out of. That is where it is born, literally, and its constitution and the first meetings that they had. So this is all on their minds. Did they participate in Emancipation Day celebrations and the parade? Maybe. We don't know. Did they object to the parade? Possibly, as all of this was going on there. We haven't yet done enough digging, which is why we're looking for volunteers for the preservation. But since Benjamin Taylor, who had been president, literally lived on Lafayette Square, and this parade and the president were all going through Lafayette Square, they had to know about it. They saw it. They were in the city. Most of these guys live downtown. So whether or not they approved or disapproved or went outside and waved a flag, we don't know. But they certainly were at least aware of it. The parade itself is going to happen yearly from 1866 to 1901. And Frederick Douglass himself will be a keynote speaker at least a dozen of these. But by the 1880s, there were competing visions. Yes?
Cindy, quick question.
Tim?
Do we know whether any of these AOI founders were slave owners who were compensated in 1862?
We do not yet. So thank you for volunteering to do that research, because that is a good question. I like that. So we know that some of the founders and some of the original members were former slave owners. So we do know that, because some of them, especially William Bradley, when he died, there were items in the newspaper about how wonderful and what a great friend he had been to the black community in Washington. And yet, some of those accolades were from people who were formerly enslaved by Bradley and his family. So, again, there's a lot of mess that's in there. So it would be very interesting to know whether or not they are on that list. And there are lists for that. So
The government did pay reparations to that one time.
they did. And so there are absolutely rolls from the Treasury Department that we can look at. Great question. It's a great idea. No, we're gonna find that out. We like that. So by the late 1880s, there were competing visions as to what the celebration should look like, what the parade should look like, and there seemed to be divisions among even the African-American community in DC, somewhat like, if you recall Derek Gray talking about this when there was a split in the NAACP and different competing visions about what some of civil rights should look like and activism should look like in the city. So there does seem to be a class issue that was a division between people who had been working for the federal government and were educated, and people who were laborers and service workers and oftentimes had come in and were not multi-generation Washingtonians. And that ended the parade in 1901. There was no more parade for that. But we don't know whether the AOI founders were there, but we do know that AOI Inc., which was established in 1912, which was the African-American counterpart to AOI, thought that this date, April 16th, was important enough that they adopted it as their Founders' Day. And they also had their annual banquet every year on April 16th. And this is I don't know if you can see it, but that's from 1921. And William Nixon, who was president in the 40s and through the 60s, early 60s, was a huge advocate for Emancipation Day celebrations. So there was a need. It's not that Emancipation Day wasn't celebrated. It was celebrated with lectures and church services and at banquets, but it was not a huge citywide celebration with the parade anymore. So there was advocacy on that behalf. So how did we get it back? Mostly after 100 years, it was thanks to Loretta Carter Haynes. Loretta, she was an educator who was with Reading is Fundamental, if you know that program, which started here. And she came across mention of the parade and the celebrations. And so she started advocating through the 80s and 90s. She was educating, she was lobbying, she was laying wreaths at the Emancipation statue on Capitol Hill. She was doing awareness campaigns in schools with her son Peter, as well as with the historian C.R. Gibbs. They would go out, they would have. In 1992, they had a ceremony at Freedom Plaza that was sponsored and supported by the National Park Service. So she was steadily growing ground with it. And it was thanks to her that the parade was brought back in 2002. Unfortunately, she was too ill to attend that parade in 2002. She would eventually live till 2016. So she did get a chance to kind of eyewitness some of what was going on. But it's mostly thanks to her. And the acknowledgement of the day is in a big part thanks to Vincent Orange, who is a former DC council member, who introduced the legislation and also sponsored and tried to get that through. When it returned in 2002, on April 16th, it was over 90 degrees on that day. As it is. And they did have in Franklin Square, which was the site of the original 1866 celebration, they had a concert with Chuck Brown, so there was go-go music. And Frederick Douglass IV, the great-great-grandson of Frederick Douglass, was on hand to give a speech as well. So, it slowly grew. It wasn't that popular at first, but they eventually, by 2006, got to be about 10,000 people. And just this year, they're moving it. They announced like a day ago that they're moving the celebration to downtown because they're expecting so many people to turn out for Emancipation Day this year. So I think as we look at AOI and its creation and the mission that it has to kind of recount history and to recount its memories and to preserve DC history, but also to create community, because it has done that as well, I think we see that seems to be an inherent part of the DC culture. We see that with trying to resurrect the DC Emancipation Day, for acknowledging it, for making sure that everybody knows about its history, for sharing the education. So I think AOI came out of this kind of turmoil, but is also inherently a part of that turmoil and a part of that sense of reclaiming and making sure that people understand what happened in DC, the honest history of DC, and making sure that gets passed down from generation to generation. So that's my connection with AOI and Emancipation Day. And there's some great books if you're interested in learning more about both Emancipation Day, that era, and Reconstruction in DC. If you're interested in any of those, let me know. I can get you more information on that. Okay, quick, so I want to quickly go through some information about events, but I want to pass this over to they're both pointing to Denise. So we have representatives from the Foggy Bottom Historical Association that's here in DC today, here at AOI today, who are also AOI members, both Denise and Frank. And they're going to tell us a little bit about what's coming up at Foggy Bottom.
Sure.
I think it's hold it for just one more. It may have, Frank, come on up.
Yeah, very quickly. Hi, I'm Frank Leone. I'm here with Denise Vogt. We're co-chairs of the Foggy Bottom Association History Project. We have some information, and you're going to hear more about Foggy Bottom today, really interesting stories. But we have some information in the back on our historic district walking tour and our map. And we've just updated our map to include census data from 1930. So we've got census data from 1880 to 1930, and you can see how the neighborhood developed. And we also have our walking tour. We also have a blog called Funkstown. We don't have a podcast yet, but we're inspired. We might do that. And I want to recognize the president of the Foggy Bottom Association, John George.
If you are not familiar with this, it's a phenomenal interactive map where you can put your cursor on any of these buildings and it'll give you information and history about all of these buildings that fall within the historical district. So it is absolutely fantastic. You can get to it from their website, right? And give me the exact website.
FoggyBottomAssociation.org.
FoggyBottomAssociation.org. And I think there's some links probably if you're a DC. We're going to give you a link on our web, again, go back to our website. We're going to give you a link to that too. And the information is on the table by the fireplace in the back if you're looking for it. So check it out. It's really fun to play with. And it's really great information that's on there. There's a lot going on. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I think one of the most important to note is that the DC History Conference is coming up May 1st and 2nd. You can register. It's free to register. It's free to go. You can show up and listen to different programming that you can go to the DC History Center website to find out more about. AOI is sponsoring a session there, which you will see our name if you go to one of the sessions. And the session that we are sponsoring is How Do We Free DC? So it is going to be about federal and local control and authority over DC and a bit of home rule and autonomy. So again, there's a lot going on. If you're looking for something to do on these weekends, there's some more tours, and there's information about walking tours that are back on the back table as well. But especially of note is the running of the Chihuahuas at the wharf, which was new information to me. That apparently is like in its 10th year, that they've had down there. Somewhere in DC they've had. But all of these, again, we will put on our website and social media. So if you're looking for things to do in this crowded spring, take a look at our website for that. Before I turn this over to Nelson, I want to make sure that you're aware that next month we are continuing in our Family Legacy series with Rebecca Boggs Roberts, who I believe is currently the Deputy Director of Programming for the Library of Congress. But she is also connected to Cokie Roberts and to Lindy Boggs, and she's going to be talking about kind of 3 generations of Washington women. So that will be our next month. And Nelson, turning it over for some trivia.
Okay. I handed out earlier, when not everybody was here, a little pamphlet that I put out about a copy of the Emancipation Act and a page about Lincoln and his involvement in it. I will mention that it was compensated emancipation. Lincoln's cabinet was very divided on this. Some strong members of the cabinet were advising him, don't do this. Don't ask Congress to do this. Because the South will see it as you're going to pursue it, and it'll give them more resolve to fight and fight and fight to preserve slavery. And Frederick Douglass and others were urging him, of course, to ask Congress to do this. A lot of the Republican leaders came and met with Lincoln and said, it will not pass unless it's going to be compensated emancipation. We don't have the votes for it otherwise. So Lincoln, of course, when he came to Congress, his one term, introduced a bill to do this. So I think he was determined to carry this out. And so in politics, we know sometimes you have to make compromises. And so we got emancipated, compensated. $300, of course, was the limit. As I say, there's more information on it in here. That I have extra copies are back on the mantelpiece back there. Please take one. Also, I was present at the signing of the bill to make this an official holiday. My picture is back there. So I'm making this up. I'm looking over and seeing William signing it. So AOI was represented at the signing of the bill. Okay, well, I was interested in one thing, of how many of these emancipated slaves stayed in the District of Columbia, and what did they do here? And doing some research, I found that, and this is the trivia question that results from this research I did. The oldest black Catholic congregation in the District of Columbia was organized by a dedicated group of former slaves, including many who were freed on April 16, 1862, when President Abraham Lincoln signed the District of Columbia Emancipation Act. They raised funds and contributed their own labor to the establishment of this church. Fundraising efforts for the church received a boost on July 4, 1864, when President and Mrs. Lincoln hosted a, quote, strawberry, unquote, festival on the White House lawn. So the Lincolns had some interaction with some of these advanced slaves that this act liberated. It's kind of interesting. I'm trying to find out more if there are reports on this, who was, apparently it was an all day long event. The church was dedicated in 1876 and went through several locations, but today worships in its majestic cathedral located at 15th and V Streets Northwest. Now the rules are, if you've won before, please consider yourself not eligible, unless nobody else can get it. 2, raise your hand. Don't shout out information. Now, I'd like to maybe limit it to people who have recently joined AOI. Do we have anybody here like that? Do we have a group of people in the last year or so joined AOI? One back here, a couple. Well, we'll make it the last 2 years anyway. So the question is, name the church. You got it. St. Augustine's.
I'll also make a connection for AOI and St. Augustine, because that is where the funeral for member Roquanda was, in St. Augustine.
Okay.
All right, it's still going strong. We come today now for our presentation. We have our AOI member, Leo Waring, who's going to be talking about, I don't know if I want to make sure, yes or no on there? Okay. Let me make sure we get that up. Sorry, I probably messed that up, Walter. Did I? I will have you do that as I introduce. So Leo is the son of one of the members of the Foggy Bottom Gang, and he has lived in DC, in the DC area his entire life. So after retiring from a 40-year career at the U.S. Department of Treasury, he devoted his time to writing an account of the Foggy Bottom Gang, drawing from newspaper archives and personal stories. He's logged over 1,000 hours as a patient care volunteer at Children's National Hospital here in DC, and he and his wife Kathy have 2 adult children and now 5 grandchildren to carry on. But I'm assuming that you don't affectionately call them the Foggy Bottom Gang or the Wearing Gang, as the 5 of them are. No, and he is his book is, if you haven't seen it, it is in the back, and it is available today for a special price for AOI members at $10, and it is a great read. So I'm going to let Leo tell you about it, and then I know you were going to be interested probably in going back to do that. So thank you. We're so glad to have him here today, Leo. I pass it over to you. I will ask for it. This is for you. I leave this here. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Cindy, and the AOI board for extending the invitation to me to speak about my book, The Foggy Bottom Gang. As you can see the cover here, that is my father on the far left. Charles Rags Waring, my uncle Emmett, who was basically considered the brains of the outfit. He was only a little over 5'4", so he was referred to as the little man behind his back.
You're a little taller than I was.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to do
I'm
this.
sorry.
You can hear it. There you go.
Okay, I apologize. So again, the middle guy is my uncle Emmett, who was considered the brains of the outfit, but called the shots. And he was referred to as the little man behind his back, such as when a bookmaker got locked up by a policeman, he would warn the policeman, the little man's not going to be happy with this. And in the far right is my uncle Leo, whom I was named after. And he was basically the person who administered all the office bets that came in, and he kept track of all that. As you see on the top there, the publisher asked me to come up with a hook to try to put on the cover of the book, and I came up with, in the town of lawmaking, 3 brothers strive in law breaking. A little bit of a hyperbole, but it's so books. Probably can't read this, but down at the bottom there's a plug for my book from Mr. AOI himself, Bill Brown, who was so gracious to put give me a quote to put on the book, and I'll be forever grateful for that. So, together with their associates in the business of illegal booze and illegal lottery, they made up the Foggy Bottom Gang, or the Georgetown Mob, as sometimes referred to by police, reflecting their influence over both sections of town. When instead of starting my story with a traditional historical story like once upon a time, I'm going to basically steal a technique from movies where they open the movie with an event that happens in the middle or at the end of the story and then flash back like that. I guess most famously done in Citizen Kane with the Rosebud opening of the movie. So it wasn't lost on me the irony that I've been come to talk here today, the day after tax day. And it was the Internal Revenue, or in those days it was called the Bureau of Internal Revenue. Later they put the name Service at the end, and I think many taxpayers are still trying to figure out whom they service. But it was the Internal Revenue that probably gave the Waring brothers the most trouble over the years. I said, the brothers were indicted in 1938. Let's see if I can learn how to play this. There you go. And you see the the caption there from the Star. All three brothers were indicted, although Emmett was the one who basically kept the books, hired an accountant to do the tax return, and he's the one that paid the Internal Revenue Service. But my father and my Uncle Leo were also indicted with that tax charge. Emmett there, I never saw him wear sunglasses before, except in this photo. Probably because, if you remember back in those days, if somebody went in the outside court, the cameraman, newspaper cameraman, used a bright flash. And that's probably why, I'm guessing, why he wore them those days. Emmett thought that unlike Al Capone, who turned in no returns, paid no taxes, he thought by submitting returns and paying some taxes, he would avoid being charged with a felony. But unfortunately, I guess he was charged with a felony because he underpaid so much, what the IRS thought it should be. You know, it must be intimidating to be in court and hear the United States government versus, and then they read your name. I would think that'd be pretty intimidating. The first trial ended in a hung jury. The jury was out for days, and at the time it broke records in the district for jury deliberation. Here's my dad at the beginning of the second trial, and it was said that he was seen talking to the major IRS witnesses on the case. And I can hear him now telling them that, you know, guys, this all could have been settled with a couple of beers down at Pete Daly's. But the truth is, the IRS was not looking for the Waring brothers to pay their fair share of taxes. Their ultimate goal was, like with Al Capone, was to put him behind bars. You also see there, and this probably can't read it at the time, but they actually listed the jury members who were going to be on the second trial, with their name, their address, and their occupation. Later they found out that wasn't such a good idea. At the end of the second trial, my Uncle Emmett took the rap, and my Uncle Leo and my dad only had to pay fines. But by Emmett taking the rap, he gained instant respectability with the members of his new closed gated community of Lorton Reformatory. But while at Lorton, my Uncle Emmett seemed to enjoy certain privileges that were not extended to other inmates who did not have guards on their personal payroll. And excuse me for being somewhat flippant about some of these things, but my mother recalls the guards coming up to my aunt's house up on Massachusetts Avenue to be paid on Sunday. Now, one more thing, and I'll talk about the genesis of my book. Here's a headline, and they were basically charged for underpaying their taxes in 1935, 36, and 37. But you see, they put the take there is 1.3 million. Now, if I could channel our friend Nelson for a moment, who remembers O'Donnell's Seafood Restaurant on East Street? Oh, okay. I know they had branches in Maryland, but of course they started down in DC. And if you went in 1938, if you went into O'Donnell's on a Wednesday between 11:30 a.m. and midnight, okay, and you ordered the fisherman's platter, you got soup, fried lobster, filet of sole, tartar sauce, crab cake, fried scallops, French fried potatoes, coleslaw, homemade rum buns. Yeah, I know that. Yeah. Bread, butter, and coffee, tea, or a glass of beer. How much do you think you'd have to pay for that fare? Yeah. $5, I hear? 10? Oh, okay, let's see what it would cost. As you can see there, you could get away for 50 cents. And maybe if you had a kid with you, I know what we ate at O'Donnell's, and the big deal was at the end, you finish and you're walking out, they had a treasure chest. And if you ate all your food, you could pick in there. And it was kind of like the toys were kind of a slight upgrade from the McDonald's Happy Meal that they are now. Now, I mentioned in the preface of my book that my son was in law school when he, just for the hell of it, searched in a legal database his own name, Charles Waring. That was his name, that he shared with my dad. Well, one case popped up, and that was when the case went all the way, appealed to the Supreme Court that involved my uncle and my dad. And he had heard about some stories, whatever. He's kind of thought that there's something unusual going on here about my family. But I start thinking to myself, there are approximately almost 300 articles on the archives in just the Washington Post, not to mention the other 3 dailies that used to have back in DC during the 30s. And most of those articles, of course, had a negative connotation. So I became with the idea, I need to write something lasting that, yes, addresses those negative stories, but at the same time, give background and context to those stories. And mention some of the positive things that were nowhere in those articles. But I confess, I will probably go to my grave somewhat unsure whether I should have written the book or not. And I say that at least one relative put it, said that he let me know that I should have left those things buried with the characters of my book and not brought them to the surface again. So while I was working there at the Treasury, I started to scratch things down when I went to lunch about some things I wanted to put in a book. But after retirement, I had more time, and I was able to interview a few people who contributed to the book. One was longtime AOI member Mary Brown. Some of you might remember Mary. Well, she described an episode when she was a teenager that she ducked behind a tree and heard bullets going by as the Waring brothers chased some unwelcome bootlegger out of the bottom, as it was called by the locals at that time. I also spent a lot of time in the old Washingtonia section of Martin Luther King Library. And when I started doing the research, they had not digitized them yet. So I had to pull out the old microfilm and put it in a microfilm reader and go and try to find the dates that something might have happened that would be interesting in there, and going through the whole thing. And if you grew up in Washington and like history and old-time sports, you can get easily distracted by going through those pages. And it was such distraction that got me to see this one day. Let me tell the story about the Waring brothers without telling the story about the Waring brothers for those who haven't read the book yet. It starts out with the brothers' days living as youths, living in Foggy Bottom, just 10 blocks away from the White House, and working for their father's barrel shop or cooper shop on K Street, just under where the Whitehurst Freeway is today. The oldest brother, James, broke off from his father and started his own barrel business on South Capitol Street, which was right across the street where the current National Stadium is now. Foggy Bottom and Georgetown were quite different back then than they are today. I think the port of Georgetown, because that was the highest part the ships could go up the Potomac, had commerce right there on the waterfront, and my grandfather's barrel shop was one of them. Also, Georgetown had a lot more immigrants and African American population back then. Remnant of that is at least three operational black churches are still in Georgetown today. Foggy Bottom was apparently given its name because of river fog and industrial smoke from all the industry that was in Foggy Bottom at that time. I don't know all of them, but I know one, the Hyrick Brewery, was down there. And they too had a mixture of immigrants and African Americans. One of the places down there had alley dwellings, and maybe the most famous was Snow's Court that was there. And the one African American that worked for my uncle and father for years, from a youth till when I was living, was a gentleman by the name of Chick Edmonds, and he lived right outside of Snow's Court. But the bottom line, both sections were more populated than they are today. And I guess the same could be true for Southwest Washington too, where they had a lot of basically immigrants and African Americans. But by having so many poor middle class, well, they were the residents most likely to be a consumer of bootleg whiskey and illegal numbers. The first illegal business that my uncle and my father were engaged in was bootleg whiskey. And they ran they got the bootleg whiskey mostly from southern Maryland and ran it up here. And my dad was one of the main runners for that. But in those days, they had engines with 8-cylinder, where the police only had 6-cylinder. And that was before the time the police had radios in the car, so they couldn't even radio up front for help. I met a guy by the name of Joe Osterman, a policeman who lived to be 102, and Joe was part of the group of policemen that tried to catch these bootleggers. And he said, they had their job, we had our job. He said the only thing we didn't like is when they crossed the line and did smoke screens or oil slicks. He said that could have endangered the policemen. There was a group of a gang that was in control of Foggy Bottom and Georgetown before the Foggy Bottom Gang, and that was the Colleen Gang. And there was one kind of famous, noted story involving a run-in between the members of the Foggy Bottom Gang and the Colleen Gang up on U Street. And then that was when U Street was called by Pearl Bailey the Black Broadway. Had a lot of clubs like the Cotton Club in New York that basically had black musicians, black waitresses, black bartenders. I'm not sure about black ownership. That's something I don't know. But its patrons were a mix of white and black. And as you can see here, this is a picture of my father's on the father's left, Charles Rags Waring. The guy next to him was with him at the time of the trouble, Victor Toots Giuliano. And yes, there wasn't just a movie that those guys had nicknames like Toots. Over here was a friend he grew up with, Don Wallace. Now, The guy in the middle is Ehrlich, Myron Ehrlich, who was one of the better defense attorneys in town. He had a brother named Jake, though, was even more famous for him. Jake was a defense attorney for celebrities out in Hollywood. He had such clients such as Errol Flynn, James Mason, Billie Holiday, and he even coached Raymond Burr before Raymond Burr took the role of Perry Mason. Jake Ehrlich had a motto, though. He said, and his motto was, never plead guilty. It sounds like a defense attorney. Now, let's see what time, I'll try to go quickly here. Ooh, I got time. I'm trying to give you a quick lesson in Gangsterism 101. First, movies and documentaries sometimes lumped those guys in the rackets in the cities who were basically doing, illegal booze and illegal numbers with the John Dillinger type, or Bonnie and Clyde, because they both had their share of gunplay. But if you had lumped John Dillinger with if you suggested to my dad or my uncle they were like John Dillinger, they would be highly insulted, because John Dillinger robbed people at the point of a gun. They would tell you that they never forced anybody to place a bet or take a drink. Now, I don't know if everybody would agree with that. I'll tell you a quick story that I saw the movie Bonnie and Clyde when I was in college, 1967. And I was impressed by the realism and the car chases and all that. And I came home and I brought my father down at the Town Theater right near the bus stop. I don't know if anybody remembers that or not, to see Bonnie and Clyde. Well, that was a mistake. He quickly identified it as Hollywood glorifying a bunch of young punks. And, he wasn't into it at all. Now, one thing I'll add, it's strange, the people who ran the rackets placed a high premium on honesty. Maybe not in running maybe not in paying their taxes, but for the people who worked for them, they had to be honest. There was a lot of dependency on that. And so, one of the more famous mafia hit jobs was on Bugsy Siegel. And what was Bugsy Siegel accused of by the mob? Skimming off the top. The next photo is a photo of my Uncle Leo, who had a fascination with horses, the kind you bet on and race, that is. And you see what interesting in that photo to me is that it looks like a government building in the background there. Perhaps some of y'all remember when Washington, you had horses like in Washington, you had stables. And I don't have to say, well, I remember, like I do, some water troughs down in the monument area, grounds area. Now, Leo took the bets on horses, on races. Emmett didn't want any part of it. It's not that Emmett didn't trust the horses. Emmett didn't trust the people who rode on the back of the horses. Quickly, and brings up a difference between, a lot of times talking about how people, writers would lump gamblers and bookmakers together. Well, bookmakers were ones who took the bets, and if they had enough volume and over time, it was no gamble at all. But gamblers were the ones, the people who would pay a bet on a 3-digit number, which you had 1 in 1,000 chance of coming out, but you would only get paid 500 to 1. Or back then, that was one thing, the difference between the nowadays and back then. Back then, the bookmakers, I should say, paid 600 to 1. So when it was taken over by the states, they dropped it to 500 to 1. let me move on because I know it's getting close to 2 o'clock here. In the early 50s, the Warren Brothers were put in the spotlight by two events. One was a week-long expose in the Washington Post entitled The Charmed Life of Emmett Waring. And you can see the ad there for the expose. It was done mostly by Alfred E. Lewis. Lewis was the Post main beat reporter, and he bonded with policemen. He wore the white socks and the police-issued blue sweater, and he once told Ben Bradley that you can be a good, nice guy and still do your job. And in the same vein, he became very good friends with my uncle. Yeah, my uncle knew that he was going to report about certain things, but he knew Al Lewis wouldn't do a hatchet job on him. And I met Al Lewis's daughter a few years back, and she told me about going to Emmett's house with her dad and Emmett serving her basically big bowls of ice cream and things of that nature. If I could read this showed up every day in the 7 days the articles ran. This is a story of a man of importance and influence in Washington. He is a financial success in a multi-million-dollar local business, who contributed to many worthy causes, the employer of hundreds of workers, the first-name intimate of policemen, lawyers, and leading citizens. His illegal numbers game is patronized daily by tens of thousands. The purpose of these articles is not to smear with ignominy or glid with glamour, but to flood with publicity. He has been a hidden force in this city, and a secret force in the city. Citizens need to know those who, for good or evil, influences their daily lives. The second thing that put that Warren Brothers on the spotlight was the Senate Committee on Crime. We all perhaps have heard about the Kefauver Committee on National Crime, but the Senate came back and had their own, basically, committee investigation on crime just in the district. All right, it was televised for a number of days, and my uncle was called. Well, first of all, he was one of the few that came up. A lot of the gamblers who were called to come suddenly had sick notes from their doctor and couldn't make it. But here's my father that's just my uncle being sworn in at the televised hearings. If I got a moment here, let me talk briefly about some of the people who were looking down their noses at my uncle while they were quizzing them about my uncle's influence, especially with policemen. A lot of Southern Democrats were on the committee, and who were signers of the Southern Manifesto, which was a statement against integration. There was also a gentleman from Idaho, Senator Herman Welker. Well, he was a good associate, close associate with Joe McCarthy, and almost like a Joe McCarthy kind of style, he tried to get a guy by the name of a Democrat from Wyoming called Lester Hunt. What happened? Hunt's son was arrested in Lafayette Park soliciting prostitution from a male undercover officer. And normally, back then, if some underage person was charged with some sort of sex crime, they would just be returned to their family. Well, somehow Herman Welker heard about it, and they went to Hunt and said, "We want you to either resign or declare you're not going to run again in '54." And Hunt refused to. And Herman Welker, true to his threat, made sure the papers got notice of the thing. Well, unfortunately, Senator Hunt, who was also battling various illnesses, one day went to his office, Senate office, and sat down at his desk and committed suicide. So these are the kind of people that were looking down at my nose as my uncle at the time. One of the more interesting questions that came in, my uncle took the fifth like 200 times. But one more interesting question, one of the senators asked him, we understand you're a clairvoyant. Well, Emmett didn't quite maybe know what the word clairvoyant, whatever, and asked the senator to explain himself. And the senator said, well, it's understood that you know of captain police the captain of police precincts being transferred out of their precinct before the police captain knows. And of course, he took the fifth on that one, too. But he had a lot of influence over police, no question about that. Lane Phillips, who later got into real estate in DC, told me this story that when he was a kid, he'd gotten a BB gun, and he lived down the street from Emmett. He went to Massachusetts Avenue, like 39th and Mass, and shot the BB gun over to the park area across the street from Massachusetts Avenue. He was found by the police. The police took the BB gun away from him and confiscated it. So Lane Phillips' mom said, when your dad gets home, you got to tell him what happened. So Lane Phillips waited and waited, and then he looked up the street where Emmett's house was, and Emmett was out watering the grass, and his dad had stopped to talk to Emmett from the bus stop. Well, he went up there, and Lane Phillips told the dad about the incident, about this BB gun being confiscated. And Emmett just kept watering the grass as though he wasn't paying attention. Well, Lane Phillips got home, and at dinner that night, there was a knock on the door. And it was a sergeant from number 8 who had the BB gun and gave it back to Lane Phillips and explained it was all a misunderstanding. Let me move on. So the police, the IRS, I should say, were not finished with Emmett yet. After doing time in Orton in 1954, they got him again. And this time he did time in Lewisburg up in Pennsylvania. I digress easily, I'm so powerful. But to see the red lead mob, it goes back in those days, the papers referred to communists as Reds, Reds, Reds. So much so that the baseball team, the Cincinnati Reds, changed their name to Redlegs during the 1950s. All right. Excuse me for that diversion. All right. The reason he got charged with it was basically a sensational piece of evidence that the IRS came up with him, and I'll let you people to read the book. Finally, when he went to jail, my Uncle Emmett, there's an article from the Daily Post saying, there's sadness in Foggy Bottom, Emmett's gone. I thought when I saw the headlines, the priest said, it's going to bring a lot of sadness to Foggy Bottom. Christmas isn't going to be the same with Emmett and the Clink. And later down there, the priest says, there's a lot of guys that have no errors or whatever, but they don't do anything positive neither. And Emmett was known for being gracious. And my father was an easy touch too, but he didn't have Emmett was sitting on most of the money though. Let me end by two things real quick. One thing I failed to put in the book I want to make clear. I don't know why. I wanted to come over as a kind of a really neutral person when I wrote the book, and I wouldn't think I was just doing it. And one of the things I failed to mention how much I love my dad and still miss him, and even today, and I don't know anyone else does this, think about their dead parents and think, well, what would they think if this or that? I don't know how many people do that. And finally, let me suggest that everyone here should write a book. Maybe not get it published, but write a book about your family. Maybe it's not as, there's not 300 articles in the Post about them, but I guarantee you that if you capture those stories, things that you heard and all that, there will be somebody some ancestor down the road will look at it and be glad you did it, you wrote it. It doesn't have to be published, just have it bound. And you can do that relatively cheaper. So with that, I'll turn it over to any questions.
Hello, Leo.
Yes.
Good to see you, old buddy. Back to the point on the editor's notes. I grew up in Southwest DC. My family's lived in that area, believe it or not, for 4 centuries almost. I come out of the Quander clan. About being a good guy in society not understanding you. James D. Waring, barrel and crate. If you were young and you were black and you were going off to college and you were short of a few pennies, somehow or another those pennies would end up at your house. And my old buddy Herb Holmes, we talked about that quite a bit. My late cousin, better known as Blue, Robert Johnson, we talked about that. So there were a lot of facets to this. How do I know? Because my late godfather was also a financier and an entrepreneur. He had and ran the colored numbers games in the southwest section of the city. So that's my association. The other thing, Leo, I'm sorry you didn't tell the story about the car race.
Oh.
But yeah, so it was not all what you would believe. And guess what? If I had to do all over again, I'd like to have another James D. Waring in my life.
Well, thank you for saying that, Carl. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Speaking of tangents, that headline was Red Lead Mob Wrecks Calcutta section.
Yeah.
What's the Calcutta section?
Oh, no, that was national news.
Oh,
Below the
they
local.
put it right in the.
It was
oh,
below
okay.
the local story about my
Oh, okay.
my
I
uncle.
thought there was a
Yeah.
neighborhood I never
No,
heard of.
no, I'm sorry to confuse you. Yeah.
We get Tim right over there.
Thank you. I've been concerned lately regarding U Street. I see a lot of publicity going on U Street, but I never hear any mention about the U Street Business and Professional Association, of which I served as secretary. You had Gardner Bishop, you had Ted Higgins, who owned the hotel there, which became a senior citizens building. Mr. Powell, who was the optometrist there on the corner. Evelyn's Restaurant. I just never hear anything. I hear all of this, and also the nightclubs, all up and down U Street. I read today about things happening on U Street, but I never hear anything. I just want to find anything about the U Street Business and Professional Association. And matter of fact, they get the name of school after Gardner Bishop.
And Vera, I think to your point, I'm sorry, I'm behind you. I just read that the DC Preservation League is actually focusing on legacy businesses, and several of them are along the U Street corridor. So I will send you something. I will send you something on that to take it. Yes. So we'll talk after.
Another reason why it's good to write your own stories, because they haven't been captured.
I have a question for our amazing speaker, but I want to address the questioner first. I'm on the board of AOI. We just submitted a letter in support of Gardner Bishop Elementary School, the renaming of the slaveholder Brent Elementary. It's going to be renamed Gardner Bishop. And I learned a lot about Gardner Bishop. He was an amazing guy. He was known as the barber of U Street. And he was fierce. He was fierce. He did not want his daughter to go to this segregated school that was overcrowded, and he organized what became, the DC case that led to the Supreme Court case. So we're on Gardner Bishop. So great question. But my question to our speaker: thank you so much for bringing us the story of your family. And I loved it when your son was in law school. He decided to, find law, Lexis, Westlaw, whatever. Yeah. My question to you is: when did you, as a kid, become, have some understanding of your illustrious roots.
Well-
Was it known that your uncle went to prison a couple of times? Thank you.
Well, yeah, I did know that because my aunt used to come Sunday mornings because they had visiting rights up at Lewisburg twice a month. So she would come to pick up my dad, and it would be a big brouhaha because my dad wouldn't be ready to go as usual. And so I knew that. And I knew he was into something illegal. He used to bring me over to they paid a farmer over in Virginia, not in like McLean, it was close by, so they could run their office out of there, taking bets in Virginia. So I would go with them there. Now, I never asked him what would happen to me if they got a raid. Pardon?
How old were you then?
Oh, I was about maybe 7 or 8 or something. I was pretty young. Yeah, and I do remember letting the chickens out one time and catching a lot of hell for that. But yeah, that's where they were. I did know about the shootings and things of that nature, and I did find some basically newspaper articles under my parents' bed one time, like when I was a teenager.
Well, thank you for writing the book. I can't wait to read it.
Oh, I appreciate the nice words about that.
I'll get the for Nelson.
Anyone considering dining at O'Donnell's restaurant tonight, don't forget to leave a 5-cent tip. If you're feeling real generous, 10 cents.
Yeah. I put that in there just to give context to the $1 million take over there. Yeah.
And thank you for the book. Snow's Court has been one of my favorite streets. When I was a teenager, I think it was 20 Snow's Court.
Yeah.
I want to buy that. But I want to also mention about Black Broadway, U Street. I was a director of development for the Women's National Democratic Club, and we produced a Black Broadway show here. And just for people who didn't know, since this is Emancipation Day, Franklin Delano Roosevelt would celebrate a couple of his birthdays at the Lincoln Theater, had a colonnade ballroom beneath, I guess, and he would have Louis Armstrong perform there. So that was, I think, I actually tried to find the year for it. I think it was 1943. So anyway, a couple of years. So that's some valid history for today.
Yeah.
And anyway,
thank you.
I'd like to talk to you more about your book.
Great.
Thank you so much.
I do have copies of the book back there. You can get them on Amazon for $10.86, but they're going today for just $10.
And your autograph, right? We
Yes.
get your autograph with it.
And I also bought copies of that 50-cent ad in case someone wants to bring home and spring that on their family.
Yeah,
members and
O'Donnell's.
friends.
Okay, thank you, Sydney, for your historical perspective. Yeah.
I'm going to get you as I get the mic to you. Can I ask, because we're talking about a couple of different groups that may have been running numbers, was there competition, and was there any kind of divisive
Numbers, I
violence
had
between the
not
two?
heard of any stories. There were two prominent black bookmakers in town, White Top Sinkums and Puddinhead Jones. All these guys got nicknames. White Top did show up for the Senate hearings, and he took the fifth all the time. One bit of almost levity was one senator only got halfway through his question, and White Top says, "I refuse to answer." So he realized it was a waste of time for that senator to continue his question.
Just real quick, while you were talking, I looked up the CPI, and $1.3 million in 1930 would be the equivalent of about $32 million today.
Wow, I didn't know that. This gentleman here. Oh, wow.
Yep, here. Let me get this. All right.
Well, you talked about some gunplay. Was heavy weapons ever involved? Tommy guns, really big battles?
No, I don't think so, to be honest with you. I haven't heard, I'm not saying there was none around and things like that. And they weren't the only ones involved in gunplay, too. There was an incident I didn't talk about that had nothing to do with the Waring brothers where a machine gun was involved, though. There was one there. That kind of thing.
Denise, will you have the last? You got it? The last question.
Thank you so much. I did want to ask if your dad, or if you had any, was there any really rapport with the neighborhood in general in Foggy Bottom, or was it?
Well, we didn't live in Foggy Bottom.
Right.
We happened to live.
When you came through, or when you?
Well, you know, again, it was starting to be changed quite a bit at that time. He did go to Foggy Bottom quite a bit to go to a place called Pete Daly's.
Oh, yes.
Okay, which was a bar down there. They were there, and the first Pete Daly's had to move because of the People's Life Insurance, which later became the Saudi Arabian, I think, consulate or whatever there. And then later, the Kennedy Center made a move from their second location. And for a while, Pete Daly's advertised in a sports program as Pete Daly's Cultural Center for a while, and there was no culture. And there, trust me. I don't know. I have time for like 30-second story. Okay, 30-second story. It is said in Pete Daly's that one Sunday, some guy from out of town walked into Pete Daly's and ordered a drink. He said, "Well, I'm sorry, sir." The bartender said, "It's not time yet to serve on Sunday," because they had to wait like at 2 o'clock or something like that. And the guy looked over, and there was drinks on somebody else's table. And he said, "Look at them. They got that." "I'm sorry, sir, I can't serve you." And he said, "I tell you what, tomorrow morning, Monday morning, I'm going to be at the office of the city chief of police, okay? And I'm going to tell him what's going on here." And the bartender says, "Well, you don't have to wait till tomorrow morning. He's over there at that table right there." That was when my uncle had a close relationship with the chief of police named Robert Barrett. They were apparently, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
I'm sorry.
As per our tradition, I present you a certificate of appreciation on behalf of AOI to say thank you, not only for being a great storyteller, but for carrying on tradition and for proposing that everybody tells their memoir. So you covered all of our bases on that. So thank you. Thank you so much. And I assume that we can meet you in the back for any books and signing and questions that are terrific. Thank you so much for being with us today. Hopefully we will see you in May. And please come find us if you have any questions, and stay safe out there. Have a great month.